Good evening. I'd like to call to order our school board study session for Monday, November 28th. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for being here. It's nice to have a full house. At this time, I will turn it to Dr. Thomas for our purpose and agenda for the evening.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. This evening for our work session, our purpose is to have administration and board members come together on a variety of different topics and roll up our sleeves, if you will, to broaden your depth of knowledge on key issues that will pertain to your governance and ultimately probably influence your abilities to bring conversations to a vote. And we have a variety of topics tonight to include several updates on some policies, but we're excited to share what we have with you all this evening.
All right. And then we always, at the beginning of a study session, talk about district governance and policy, and we always look at the Board of Education working document to make sure that the work we're doing is keeping us on track for our board roles. So this evening we'll be working on our role of district policy, primarily the 200s, but also we have some 500s and policy 804. And under operational oversight, we will be having a presentation on the world's best workforce, and we'll be discussing budget this evening. So that's pretty much the bulk of our work this evening. So at this time, we will be going on to oversight of operations, and I will turn it over to Dr. Thomas for the world's best workforce presentation.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. Tonight, we are going to give you an update on our world's best workforce. Again, this is grounded in Minnesota statute. I believe it started back in 2013. Which is every district's responsibility to ensure that students are college and career ready. And so we've covered some of this during my opening state of the district. Some of the data was not ready for the public through MDE at that time, and so we're giving you an update on some key metrics that weren't available when we gave the state of the district in the fall. And tonight we have our Director of Assessment, Jenny Zumbush, who will come forward and walk us through that presentation.
Director Nelson, Superintendent Thomas, members of the board, thank you for having me. The presentation. I'm not sure where I'm looking, sorry.
Down to your right there, Jenny. Right there.
Here.
Right there. Is that it?
Okay, got it, sorry. Okay. Okay, apologies for that. Maybe next time I'll get it right. Okay, yeah, so as Dr. Thomas said, us reporting to you on World's Best Workforce is statute through the Minnesota Department of Ed. It also is, in the past few years, has been combined with achievement and integration in terms of our reporting requirements to the state, and as well as giving some updates on World's Best Workforce goals. We will also give an update on achievement and integration. I'll have my colleague Sam O come up for that part. So as Dr. Thomas said, we are looking backwards, so this data is a bit lagged, so just to keep that in mind, we're talking a little bit about the past, and as we get into high school data, we'll be looking even further into the past, so just keep that in mind. Just a general overview of who our students are demographically from last school year. This also gives a breakdown on the number of students and percentage of students we have that are English learners, receive special education services, receive free reduced price meals, and are homeless, according to the state definition. And you can see kind of compared to the state of Minnesota how our district compares. Just to jog everyone's memory, the World's Best Workforce has 5 goals. The first one is that all children are ready for school, so that's really a kindergarten entrance oriented goal. All third graders can read at grade level by third grade. That's a research-based metric. We know that that's a predictor of success. The third one is about racial and economic achievement gaps, closing those gaps. I'll talk a little bit about some of the updated language about gaps that we've been provided by MDE. Students are ready for career and college. We'll talk about some of those metrics that we have at the high school level and then high school graduation. This is a new metric that is presented as part of this presentation. When we think about students coming in for ready for kindergarten, the district has some control over certain things with that, and a lot of things are outside of the district's control. So we really are thinking about what are the things that we can impact. One of the major things that we can impact is early childhood screening. It's really important for a lot of different things, but a new county report was given to us with this information here. And reading proficiency at the end of third grade, which is another World's Best Workforce goal, is predicted by school districts that have higher rates of early childhood screening will have been shown to have an increase in reading by third. So it's really an opportunity for us to identify students that need early intervention or early support, and that's something that we have direct control over. So here you can see how we compare to surrounding towns within our county, and we're doing pretty well, and that's something that we want to continue thinking about as we build our goals for that ready for kindergarten metric. We also screen kindergartners before they start kindergarten on our FastBridge assessment. We have had some of those children in early childhood programming. Others have come from different places or home-based care at a wide variety of different environments coming in for kindergarten. But we see that the readiness has remained pretty steady over the last few years. So this is the percentage of students who are at low risk for needing help in these areas. So we can see that that 2/3 in reading has been pretty steady over the past few years. So that means about 1/3 of our students have some or high risk of needing some support, and that's what kind of triggers an intervention early on in the kindergarten level. So here for our goal, we would like to increase the percentage of students who are in that low risk category. This was the same goal as in previous years, just to increase that. And it seems like kind of a 4 percentage point increase would be both a reasonable and aggressive goal of increasing that, that reading assessment readiness. We presented this MCA data earlier in the fall, but you can see here that Prior Lake Savage area school third graders, we did see an uptick from that 2021 kind of pandemic dip. We haven't quite rebounded to those pre-pandemic levels of 2018 and 2019. So we took kind of a multi-5-year look at these data, and in 2018 the proficiency rate was 66%, and in 2019 it was 64%. So looking at kind of an average of where we were prior to the pandemic, it's at 65% proficient, and this current our current levels are at 61. So for that, we would like to increase the MCA reading assessment proficiency level for third grade from 61. Apologies, I just see a typo there, but for 65% for 2023. As I alluded to earlier, the state is giving us some slightly different guidance on how to think about equity goals, and previously we've thought about trying to close gaps between white students and students of color, or students that don't receive special ed services and those that do. And now the guidance is a bit more that we want to be building goals within a subgroup category and not comparing it to other subgroups. And so we want to make that shift to stay in alignment with that. We also know that closing a gap could mean that the top, the person at the top, or the group at the top could decrease, and that could actually decrease your gap, which is obviously not an intended goal of decreasing a gap. So we're really looking at those subgroups that are have the biggest room for improvement and areas that we can really focus on as a district. These are also conversations that we're having at the school level on subgroups that are talked about at the school improvement level and how we can provide additional supports for those groups. So looking at our reading data, the two kind of lowest racial subgroups are Hispanic, Latino, and Black African American. So we would propose an increase in 5 percentage points for those groups, and really focusing in this year on supporting schools and their school improvement process that are really kind of looking for strategies to improve proficiency for these groups. Here, moving into the career and college readiness, we have ACT composite scores. ACT does have pretty good reporting system and a way to kind of measure career and college readiness through the ACT profile, and that's something we're really looking into at the high school on how can we use that information to work at the continuous improvement process at the high school level. Here you can see there's a little bit of a dip in the in our average score, and it also, there was a dip in the state score just a little bit as well. Here you can see the longitudinal data by race and ethnicity. When we're looking at these longitudinal graphs with subgroups, we have a pretty small sample size in a lot of the subgroups, so kind of seeing big jumps is a bit natural for smaller sample sizes. So we kind of want to look at more of a longer term trend and probably not get super nervous or super excited about a single year jump, because that could represent a small number of students. But here again, we can see that there's the same two groups. We have a prefer not to respond that's kind of sticking in there a little bit, but Hispanic, Latino, Black African American also are coming forward as the two groups that have the most room for us to support and grow those scores. And so we would like to focus on those as well for our career and college ready goal. And that would increase both average scores from about a 19 to about a 20. We're looking for that improvement there. Another aspect of career and college readiness is college enrollment. This is even further lagged because it takes a while to see where students show up and for the system to all figure out where everyone has landed. But here you can see the percent of students that are enrolling in high school after they graduate. A little more recent data that's not through the state, but just our own data here, some information about where our students of class of 2022 went for college. So we can see that there's a lot of students staying in state, a lot of students going out of state and pursuing school after they graduate from our high school. Another key indicator is developmental education. This means that a student would go to college, and if they do not place into college level courses, they would have to take developmental education classes. We don't want students doing that in general, because that means they're paying for college credits, and something that they, probably should have learned in high school. And so here you can see our rate of developmental education is very low, and it dipped even lower. So we only have a 6% rate there for the developmental education courses. So we want to continue to keep that low so that students can continue to earn credits when they get to college. Part of how we do that is through rigorous course enrollment. Here you can see kind of compared to the state, we focus a little more on AP courses and concurrent enrollment. Some schools throughout the state do IB. That's not in our district here, but we have a lot of options at the high school level for students to enroll in rigorous coursework. The 4-year graduation rate is one of the world's best workforce goals. The state always has kind of that 85% benchmark for both proficiency and MCAs and for graduation. We've been up over that number for a while now. You can see that this is for all of Prior Lake Savage area schools, so that would include both the high school and Bridges ALC. And then if you look at our Prior Lake Savage high school only, you're at about a 97% graduation rate there. Here you can see there's a little bit of, again, discrepancy by subgroup. I always, when I don't have a 0 to 100 y-axis, I always like to point that out just to show that we're zoomed in on some, the differences aren't as big as they would be if it was 0 to 100, but just to show kind of narrowing in on some of those rates. Again, we have some areas for improvement in supporting groups that are in the Hispanic Latino population as well as the Black or African American population there. So similar to the other areas, we would like to focus on those particular subgroups. Our overall graduation goal has been met for a number of years, so that would focus us in on those 2 subgroups and raising them up to at least 85%. So that would be the goal for graduation for World's Best Workforce for this year. Okay, and with that, I'm going to invite Sam up here to talk about achievement integration.
Good evening, Dr. Thomas, Chair Nelson, and members of the board. I'm going to talk a little bit about achievement and integration here, focusing on the 5 areas of work and as well as the goal that drives the work in equity for our district here. Oops. So there are 5 areas of work that we focus on in our equity work in our district here. Those areas are student voice, parent community engagement, professional development, curriculum and instruction, and our policies. I'm going to go over one by one here. For our student voice, some of you have been part of our caring and committed conversations. We strongly believe that the work that we do here is most importantly for our students that we serve. So we want to make sure that we hear from them and they get to share with us what is going well and not going well in our schools. A structure that drives a lot of the conversations with our students here is caring and committed conversations, and those are structures that bring different points of views into discussions as well as creating space for common ground to help us move forward. Community and parent engagement, some of the work that we do in this area here involves connecting with the community through our coffee and conversations that we've had in past years. I am very happy to say that we have strong partners in our community here, from our Coalition of Teachers of Color to our city leaders and to our service organization who have come around to help with our work here. As always, that a saying that we say is equity work is work we do together. So it is very important that families, schools, and communities come together to do this work here. Professional development pieces, even prior to my year being in our district here, we've had cohorts for culturally relevant teaching and learning work there that's done throughout our district, PD around that. And this year here, all our schools have equity goals that they write that will drive their professional development at their sites there. And it also is guided by the equity work that we do as well. We have 2 professional development days in October and in January. And also started last year, we had an equity summit that we partnered with other districts in Southwest Metro to provide equity PD to all our teachers around the area. We have consistent systems and structures to review our policies here, and we make sure that when we review our policies, we are looking at that through an equity lens too, to make sure that it reaches all our students and is helpful and supportive and fair to all. In terms of curriculum and practice, this is related to some of our professional development work, and also with our curriculum specialist, Dr. Dan Edwards, and our curriculum team here. When we do go through our curriculum review cycle, we ensure that we're looking at that through our equity lens as well. So some of the achievement and integration goals that drive our work in equity evolves around these 5 areas here. Improving attendance for our Native students and our free and reduced price lunch students, increase graduation rates for our Black students, create more opportunities for students to participate in MNCAPs. The specific goal that which I will share later on involves free and reduced price lunch students and increasing the numbers of students having the opportunity to participate in MNCAPs in that area. Improve student experience by promoting and supporting student voice. Ensure that staff can respond to students in a culturally and linguistically responsive manner. Some of the examples of the work that we started last year and continue on with this year here are listed here. We've had a strong engagement with our American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. They are very, very active this year, and I'm very proud to be a part of the group. We meet monthly, and the work is driven by some of the guidelines from MDE. We elect chairs and committees. And there's a lot of cultural experiences that we offer students in our Native population and outside of our Native population through strong partners such as SMSC. We are also this year here reaching out to our parent groups in our top 5 languages, which is Russian, Spanish, Somali, Cambodian, and Vietnamese. I'm happy to say that those parent groups are well attended. For our Cambodian Parent Night, we had over 40 people in the room, 35 parents and some of their students that are there. We've had 2 Russian-speaking parent nights here now, and we've strongly engaged our Russian-speaking community, especially around the area of our new Ukrainian refugees that are coming into our district here. Caring and committed conversations, we've implemented that. We've taken that from the high school-based structure to implement it district-wide here. And I've talked a little bit already about our curriculum review process. And also for our PD work there, I've mentioned there the structures that we've had in place there around PD. These are the specific goals that are laid out by Achievement and Integration, and you can find this online as well too on our website and in our Achievement and Integration Plan. As you can see, in 4 out of the 5 goals there, we have met our goals. Graduation for Black students, before I go into that, Achievement and Integration is a 3-year plan, so we set our goals for 3 years there. Graduation for Black African American students, we set that to achieve 80% by 2023. We are at 22% in our most current numbers. Caring committed conversation and our professional development around cultural relevant teaching and learning, we've implemented that district-wide. We've increased our free and reduced price lunch population's participation at MNCAPs. 6% was the goal. We met it this year with 6% of our students of MNCAPs population being from free and reduced price lunch. And we're currently monitoring our reduced absences in our American Indian population and our free and reduced price lunch population. We set the goal a few years ago to be at an average of 3 days absence per year. We're continuing to monitor that with all the illnesses going around here. I'm not so sure that we're at that target, but we'll continue to monitor that. That brings us to the end.
Okay. Questions from the board for our presenters? Mary?
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for this update. It's very, very helpful, and I can see a lot of work goes into this, and it is appreciated, so thank you. One of the questions that I sent over email earlier today had to do with the statistics, and I'll stop at 3 questions because I'm sure other people have some too. And it's just that the statistics under where, who are our students seem low. And, I remember being at a MSBA meeting in one of the breakout rooms where they kind of indicated that a lot of the self-reporting, particularly for free and reduced lunch when they apply, they say always assume such a percentage extra actually exists in your district, and they're simply not applying. The same thing goes with declaring who's homeless, and English learners a little bit more complicated. But do you have an idea of where we actually lie above where the MDE numbers are for those that actually declare themselves to be homeless or free and reduced lunch?
So Director Franz, I'll weigh in a little bit on that conversation. So yes, I think self-reported numbers, one could call into question because we're relying on folks to come forward and share that. And I think you bring up good points, particularly at the secondary level with regards to free and reduced lunch, the stigma around that and having to share that information. And then you also have conversations with students, again, some of our older students who might divulge information about not being able to, stay at home, or we don't have a house, or we're, going from family member to family member. So we need the support of our related services staff, our social workers, psychologists, et cetera, where a lot of our families and students may confide some of that information. And certainly we would invite them to apply. I know our food services folks have been very aggressive this year trying to get those applications out because of the potential underreporting from the self-report component. The homeless aspect is a little bit more challenging because, obviously there's certain state definitions that we have to adhere to of what constitutes a student to being homeless. A student who's having an issue and is not wanting to live at home, and so they're going to live at their aunt's house because something's happening at the family, that wouldn't technically qualify. But if a student were to come forward and say, my parents just lost their jobs and we're going from house to house, I mean, that's a different conversation that we can have. But we can only report what is factually submitted to us. I think for us to speculate would be just that. A speculated percentage, because I think that could vary based upon the person interpreting the data. So what I might hear at a school, what you might hear at a school, could vary greatly. So I don't believe we have a true sense of that underreported percentage per se, but we do know it's there. And so this is why we're mindful, particularly within our food services, to be very vigilant to getting those forms out, as well as really working with our local elected officials on some of those families being automatically counted and not having to apply based upon other factors at the state level. That has been a huge support for schools. So we've talked a lot about that. So again, from a board legislative advocacy standpoint, that would be an important issue, I think, for the board to continue forward with our local elected officials. And then the homeless piece with the McKinney-Vento Act, that really guides a lot of that practice. We will just continue to work with our social workers on how we can address any of the reports that come by way of a disclosure from a student or a family. I don't know if the team has anything further to add to that. Sam, you want to add?
I think on top of our efforts to make sure the communication is relayed to our parents that may benefit from this support here, our parent group meetings that we have here, we've been using that forum to relay information as well too, and I believe that has helped as well.
I appreciate that. I know that the paperwork can be overwhelming, and many, even if they need it, I'm not sure if it's stigma as much as it's time, it's, personal preference to not have to go through that if they're surviving in other ways, et cetera. I guess my overall concern in this is not to be, let's say, too reliant on lower numbers, because we know it exists, and we have to maintain that diligence. We can't just say, well, gee, we only have a few. So let's let down our guard. I think that's the biggest concern. The other concern, of course, is with COVID and the lack of needing to report in the last couple of years. And the fact that these are, of course, are going to be older numbers. We may have a little bit of shock value after the numbers come out for this year and going forward. So I'd like to keep that in mind.
I think the important piece too, Director France, if I could just share with our community, really more of an appeal to our community that, again, our related services staff in our district are there for significant levels of support. And, if a family is struggling and you're surviving versus thriving, there are many resources that our social workers, psychologists, counselors can broker on your behalf. And ultimately, that gives us as a district additional revenue when some of these forms are completed that we can support students in a more holistic manner too. So again, I just want to share that, understand that there's paperwork, there's time, there's stigma, there's a lot of factors that might go in, and I guess the appeal to our community is the distinction between just surviving, getting by, and where we might be able to help a family thrive and really rebound and get on a stronger foundation. So again, to anyone in our community, if there are challenges that a family is facing, please see your school staff, and we have someone there that can help assist and broker a lot of resources for you.
Mary, before you do your next question, could I just do a follow-up to that, clarification? So it's one thing to be aware that our numbers might be bigger than they are, but you're still required to follow certain rules in how you report those numbers, is that correct? Okay, so it's a both and. Okay, thank you.
No, I get that. It's the fact of the reporting of their own volition is what
Right.
concerns me. The numbers being from a COVID year concerns me when we had, federally subsidized lunches where people didn't feel the need to report. Also, the lack of tracking of kids when we had at-home learning could also be driving the numbers lower. And then the general, we miss a percentage anyways. That's why I wanted to point that out and make sure that we keep that in mind, and I really appreciate the feedback from Dr. Thomas on that. My next question is the school readiness, the Fall Fastbridge learning for the FBL early math, that slide. I was wondering if we have a correlation between the low risk and those who actually engage in pre-kindergarten education.
So I've been doing some work to specifically look at students that attended Circle of Friends in our system and what their FastBridge data looked like as a start to really understand the readiness indicators from the students that we have within our own system. We don't currently have access to data that would give us that information from other sources or tell us where that child attended early childhood, or whether they were at home or in a formalized pre-K setting or not.
That would be nice to know, though, because I know there's been a push to subsidize early childhood education, and I know it hasn't passed many years in a row. But when we see these numbers, obviously we'd like to see them, even though 80% seems high compared to the state, we'd like to see them a lot higher so that all children are ready. And I'm sure there's other correlations to underserved populations. But it would be interesting to be able to somehow gather that information or see if the state has it at some point. And then one of the questions that I had about the third grade reading, where we want to move up 4 percentage points. First of all, I think we need to continue that pattern of setting goals, especially those step goals, not try to overwhelm anything because there's so much outside of our control. But how, we talked about foundations, we talked about a lot of different programs. Is there anything in particular of all the programs and potentially the reading corps and stuff like that that we're trying to engage in? Is there any significant program or one significant program you think is going to keep us improving these percentage points? Could it be funding? Could it be, I don't know. It's an open-ended question.
Director France, I would say that, well, two things. One, I think the last business meeting, when we had Five Hawks come forward to present, you saw kids who were 3 years into the New Foundations core literacy, early literacy program. And what we are gathering from data, as well as hearing from what we heard that evening, is there's strong engagement with students around that curriculum. There's never going to be like the perfect thing or the perfect program. Every student will respond differently to a variety of different curricula. But what we are seeing is that collectively that is having a really good responsiveness to our youngest emerging readers. And I don't know if Dr. Edwards, if you have anything else over the years that stands out from the C&I standpoint in terms of what you've seen students responding to, but that's the one that I would highlight now that's recent for us, that's having some academic traction.
Yeah, I would really emphasize that point, and again, we saw, as you mentioned, the business meeting a couple of weeks ago, where these are our students who was identified a few years ago of a big gap that we had, and we are now in our third and final year of initial implementation, and with the continuation, we definitely feel like our teachers at the elementary feel like they are making some significant headway with our students. And I know that as they transition through the elementaries and into the secondary level, certainly also at the secondary level, I know that our middle school language arts teachers have engaged in some recent work with the language arts and reading, teaching of reading at a deeper level, and most recently this last August had some PD around that, and are actually planning to continue that into January with that, hopefully with that same individual who came to work with them, as well as at our high school level. Recently our 9 through 12 adopted a study sync that we are in year 2 of implementation of utilizing to have materials and resources that are at the level of our students, as well as challenging them to raise their level to that next level. So I think definitely we have some things that have been put in place over the course of the last few years that we certainly expect to see some dividends in that continued growth.
Thank you.
Also, just to remind you of the school improvement planning process. Schools went through, they looked at their data, they did a root cause analysis, and for a combination of reasons, one of which being the fact that we're going through a math pilot currently, a lot of the schools did land on reading as their school improvement plan goal. And so, you know, our data is reflective of what happens at the site level. And so I think that's another reason why we would expect to see an improvement in reading this year.
No, I just have a follow-up question to that, because that dawned on me. You know, when I was part of the MDE science standards a few years ago, you know, there's a lot of conversations around, are we actually testing science and math, or their ability to read and understand the problem? So are you guys seeing a correlation between just reading being kind of like the major middle ground of all the other aspects, that if they can read better, they can also do math better, they can do science better, et cetera? Are you seeing the same thing, or?
Yeah, reading is a foundational skill for all of the disciplines. When I go into classrooms and I talk to students about subjects and things of that nature, I said, you will read for the rest of your life. Whether it's reading the stop sign, and I jokingly say, or the big contract that you get when you sign for your first, job, you're gonna be reading constantly. And so we definitely want to make sure that we are emphasizing, again, not to pit, reading against math or math against science or, music, language, arts, et cetera, or music and related arts, but we do know that it's a building block discipline, and if you cannot read, math has a significant level of reading components to it. as well. And so that is one area that we definitely see, and what you saw too when you were working, with the science standards, that it cuts across all standards, content standards.
I would broaden that up a little bit too and just say language is very important. And in my area of supervision, we do see a growing number of English learners in our district as well. So students without that foundation of language skills, whether it's reading, writing, or basic vocabulary, they're going to struggle with reading. So until we're able to address that and help develop a foundation of language, that reading piece is not going to come. EL services is definitely something that has supported many of our students here as the numbers have grown as well.
And you'll see consistently across, many of our classrooms throughout the district. I know I see it everywhere I go, whether it's the high school or our middles or elementaries. There are classroom libraries in every one of our classrooms, just because if there is any downtime, grab a book. I mean, always reinforcing that love of reading. And so those language objectives, whether it's, formally through ELL, or just students who need better command of academic literacy engagement. You might not be EL, but you don't have strong command of academic language acquisition. That's the component as well, and you gather that through developing that love of reading, that passion of reading. So,
Is it okay if I open it up to other board members at this point? Other comments or questions?
Question for
Yep.
probably Sam. Can you tell me just briefly what the system-wide caring and committed conversations is kind of looking like?
Sure. So we've implemented caring community conversations at the elementary level, the middle school level, and also the high school level. It started at the high school level, and really it started as select groups of students coming together, learning about a topic, and then having discussions on that topic here, bringing in different points of view there. At the end, we always look for 3 common truths that people can agree on to, and those are the common ground that helps us move us forward. We've expanded that to the elementary level, and in certain sites, they are selecting a group of students to come and participate. Some sites have now gone on to doing caring and committed conversations inside their classroom as well, too. And the topic range from the school mission and vision, there to how to show kindness to people. So those are some of the topics that are being selected. The students themselves at the sites or guided by the teachers there are selecting the topics.
Other comments and questions? Amy? Stacy?
Go ahead. I just have one. So when we look at our Hispanic and Latino, Black African American graduation rates and increasing them by 3% is our goal. I hear caring and committed conversations, I hear attendance. What other things, concrete or not, are we doing to achieve that goal?
Well, there is definitely academic supports that we are pursuing, as well as the engagement piece also in there, making students feel safe and welcome at the buildings, the sites, in their classrooms. But there's also academic supports that are provided to the kids as well from some of our intervention courses. Some teachers are offering support during their Laker learning time as well to help improve and help kids catch up on their homework. We've had summer school offerings throughout the year also to help students in that area.
Stacy?
I'd add one more to that list is the bar program at the high school. Most specifically, just last Tuesday, I was joined the bar team of teachers, 9th grade teachers, as they were coming together looking at Q1 data. And they had decreased, and actually I'm going to encourage them to come back and share more information after semester 1 with the full board. But they had increased or decreased the number of failures in the 9th grade. Across all 9th grade in the courses included by 3%. And they were also talking about some of the specific successes they'd had with interventions with individual students, getting them supports both in school and out of school, talking to that earlier point that Dr. Thomas was making around resources out in the community as well. And then finally, also the use of Laker time as well.
And also, when you talked about the curriculum and the way we look at curriculum and making it, relevant and responsive, I would assume that also contributes the more we do that.
Yeah, and I would just add to, this is just my personal opinion, after having worked in 2 other districts here, I do feel that we do a really good job here of coordinating and speaking to each other when students move from school to school. I know there's a lot of coordination done between students moving from the high school to Bridges ALC, or even when students are just transitioning from elementary to middle school to high school, or across schools as well. And that helps students who are in transition and maybe needing that extra support, that they can find somebody that they can go to right away when they enter their new environment.
I'm good. Enrique?
Curious about min caps. So we've achieved the 6% goal, which is fantastic. What's that next goal?
Well, we are currently in the process of rewriting our next 3-year achievement and integration plan as well. And I'll be working with the team to decide what that is. I think it has to be site specific with other voices coming into play here. So I'm looking forward to getting into that work. I think it's important. We have a lot of great offerings in our program, in our district here. MinCaps is one of them. We have to make sure that students, regardless of their lived experience, have access to those programs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Don't step away yet. I have another question on the topic. Yeah, sticking with min caps, I'm just curious, what are some of those early learnings? So now they've achieved the goal and have increased access for students that are, or learners that are, that participate in the free and reduced lunch program. What are some of those early learnings? How did
we achieve those?
How did you achieve it? And what are some of the different changes that had to be made?
I think one of the things that I've learned here, only being here for a couple of years here, transportation is actually a big barrier, both at the early childhood area and MinCaps. Parents who don't have transportation to some of these things aren't able to easily access the resources that we have to provide them.
Thank you.
For Nelson, if I may, just kind of wind this down, just to culminate a couple of key points. I hope the board and the community hears very loudly that we do look through a lens of equity. And I just want to continue to redefine that, because that's a word that I know has been used in contexts that may not always resonate with folks, but equity is to give students and staff what they uniquely need to be successful. And so to Director Velasquez's inquiry, I think it's that individualized approach. This summer when we had all of our built meetings, or built teams come in at the high school, and I was floating through a variety of different schools, listening to their team conversations, and literally looking at their data and then disaggregating their data by the individual student to say, okay, now what does Michael need that Enrique, two Michaels,
Yes.
that Enrique might not need, right? So it got that granular, and when our staff are able to, take this large data and really make it personalized, and they can make their instruction differentiated to be very relevant and responsive to those unique learning needs. And when I'm out in our schools and I'm at a staff meeting and hearing some of the things that they may need to improve, one of which we'll talk a little bit about later on today around calendars, it's what does that staff need that maybe a different school staff needs, something different. And so when we lead through that lens of equity, it is looking at those unique learning opportunities that students and staff need to be successful. Nothing more, nothing less. It's a lot of work, don't get me wrong. It's not, easy work, but we don't need to over-engineer this approach. And I think that's what we're seeing time and time again. When we're finding success, it's our ability to get to that root cause analysis of what will really work for each individual student or staff.
Thank you for that. Are we at a point of repose where we can transition on, or is there lingering? Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, for the work you put into it and staying to answer all the questions. All right, we will be moving on to the proposed resolution on budget priorities discussion, and for that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Nelson and Board of Directors. So this evening, what you have before you is really just a conversation starter for the board to consider. As a senior leadership team, when we're beginning the budgeting kind of process, one of the things that several of us have engaged in with a variety of districts that we may have worked in is the board having kind of their values or priorities declared that really serve as guardrails with regards to budget. So, there's not an infinite amount of resource, available to us. And for us to be able to have some tough conversations internally, it really helps for us to be in alignment with board governance, of which budget is, a large part of your purview. And so as a team, we looked at a variety of different iterations that some districts have used. And what you see here tonight clearly is just a draft of some of our internal thinking. Not that it has to be this formal or this format, but we wanted to bring this to you for you all to consider. And if that's something that you, as we kind of modify our approach to doing budget, and the board essentially kind of putting their value stakes in the ground, this allows for a very robust conversation. Going back to, I think, Director France, you were asking earlier about, are there, key programs or things that really resonate or get the results that we're looking for? And then there are some, and you all have heard me talk about this, legacy programming that exists in, every district that I've been in at least. And that's something that we have to take a critical look at and ask ourselves, is Program A getting the return for student performance and outcome that the student deserves and desires? And if not, whether it was my pet program and I started this 30 years ago, well, if it's not getting the outcomes, we have to have that tough conversation and say that can't be something we continue to move forward, because we're putting resources there that could go into something that has a higher return in terms of student performance. And so that's what this budget priorities would help kind of govern some of those conversations. And what you'll see here, you'll see some very similar language, to our core priority work that already exists. We've kind of rephrased a couple of things, again, based upon different experiences that others have put some thoughts to. So again, just wanted to bring this forward to the board to see if there's will of the board to engage in this dialogue amongst yourselves to say, yes, this is something that we would think would be of value for you as a board, but then also then as your superintendent and administration, we can then use this board governance with our budgeting process.
Could I just clarify, we would have discussion tonight and then bring it forward again in December?
Correct. This
If
would
we
be something.
decide to move that way.
Yeah, this is something that you could have discussion on. This could be something that maybe your exec team could take a look at to bring back to board members, but yeah, this is what I'm asking is there the will of the board to engage in a process where administration would have good board value propositions on the table of what's important to you so that we can develop a budget that's reflective of those values and priorities.
So for the sake of scope, before we open discussion, I'll just make a few comments, and maybe what I'm hearing is we don't have to go through all of these words tonight and wordsmith this at the table. What we want to find out is, do we have an interest in doing this? And then what steps do we want to take to do that? Do we want it to go to the exec team to bring back and send something, via email in a draft, or how we would proceed with that? I will just say a couple comments and reflections that I have. Number one, I appreciate you asking us about board values, then going to work on the budget, as opposed to bringing the budget forward and we say, but we really value this, so we want you to go back and, take more out of this or do more of that. And so I think that's helpful. I also think, you're right that we have to provide some direction or governance so that when your teams meet, you have some guidance to say, here's the direction we were given. And then the only other question I would have too, and this could come down to how we work on it, is just, we always say where your dollars are is where your priorities are, right? And we keep coming back to that. And so I just want to make sure that that's in our thinking as we look at something like this, and also to, and I see it in here, and I think it would be like in smaller subtopics, but I want to make sure too that when we look at this, it also includes that equity lens that we talk about. And I think those would be, I almost imagine it as bullet points that aren't listed under, you know, the type of culture that we want, how we're going to recruit and retain staff, that sort of thing. So those are my opening thoughts, and I'd like to open it to discussion to the rest of you to see what you're thinking in terms of scope, implementation, and is this something our board wants to consider doing?
Right? Sure. Well, my first question is timing.
Yep.
This is for the 2023, 2024 year. And of course, since this is the, you know, I agree with all the bullets here, and I've stated that when I first read it. However, how do we bring this actually in December, or do we use December to discuss it? When would this be expected to be finalized? Particularly the wordsmithing, et cetera.
Because you start January, don't you?
Yeah, we begin our budgeting process in January. I think this is something that could easily be discussed over the course of the next month, and still give us ample time to use it in our internal conversations. But yeah, I would say January proper is when we get into the thick of the budget conversations.
Ideally, we would, if we're going to do this, agree on it by end of year, so you have it for January. Okay?
I have a question, if that's all right. Can you talk to me a little bit about how this is different from the broader strategic plan? Because that's something we approve and give direction on, so.
Yeah, I think what this does is it pulls out some salient points from that plan, so you'll see a lot of similar language, and but it just brings it to the forefront and perhaps aligns it to the funding directly versus the plan, which is this large document that guides so much of what we do. And yes, I think to Chair Nelson's point, one could say, well, follow the money trail within our academic strategic plan to see where our values are. I think it brings a collective voice of the board of some value statements that are really good for us as administration to be able to come back to if need be. So if I'm working, you know, with a department or a school and they're saying, hey, we want to do X, Y, and Z, you know, I can come right back and say, help me understand how this kind of fits with the value positioning that kind of the parameters, if you will, that our board has set. You know, I'm not seeing where that connects. I could go into the strategic plan. It's a very layered document, as you all know. I mean, what we have, that one-pager, colorful one-pager is one thing, but there's so much beneath all of that that the average staff person is probably not digging through the layers of that plan. So I think some really quick, salient bullets get us to the end conversation quicker, but there's a lot of parallel to it.
Would you also be willing to comment on something you mentioned at one of our agenda planning meetings, that there's a certain level of minimum of budget that just has to be spent for maintenance? So if building and grounds needs a new plow, they need a new plow, right? So there's that baseline, and then there's these value statements that would be on top of that.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're asking, Chair Nelson, and that is
You don't have to twist it to fit the.
Yeah, so there's core functional work, that's just the cost of doing business and
Right.
education. So, you know, we shouldn't bat our eyes about, do we need to have teachers? Well, yeah, we do, right? I mean, that's just part of the core.
Right.
It's a non-negotiable.
Right.
And yes, a snowplow might be a better, more appropriate. One could say, well, that's a like to have. Is that really a need to have? Well, come tomorrow morning,
Yep.
we're gonna need some plows, right? So I think the distinction of what we distinguish from core functional work to the enhancements that are around that core.
Yep.
And so we shouldn't have to go to bat every year for core functional work. What we're trying to get to in developing a budget is kind of, we're gonna break some of that up and just say, okay, Department X, we know that, you know, in operation, I'll just stick with that, in operations, they're gonna need X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain the operations of our district. That's just gonna be into their budget. Now, there might be some things that Jim and his team are gonna say, these would be some nice enhancements to the work that might increase our efficiency, might get better return, might make it more of a safe work environment, you know, those kind of things. And we're gonna add that into the mix and say, here's what we're gonna be asking. So every senior team member, I'm kind of opening up the budgeting process a little bit maybe from that question, but I think this helps. When we meet as a senior cabinet team, every department is gonna come forward to say, from my core functional budget, here are the things that I believe we're going to need, you know, to accomplish our goals that are aligned to what Vice Chair Nelson was saying is, or Crosby was saying, is our strategic outcomes, you know, for the district. And obviously, we're gonna have competing priorities. Jim's gonna have something, Tammy's gonna have something, and we're gonna have to choose between those two.
Right.
And I tell our staff, choosing between what's good and what's good is the toughest decision that we'll have to make, but we're gonna have to make those decisions. And then when we come back to this, we can say, okay, well, you know, how does, you know, we talk about, there was something in here about safety, glasses, but, you know, we talk about, you know, making our, ensuring the safety and security of our schools and district offices so that students are ready to learn. So, you know, if there was what we thought would be a like to have from Jim's department, that actually aligns to this bullet, well, then that's a different conversation versus something that, you know, might be well over the top. You know, maybe it's a $200,000 plow they're looking for versus a $100,000 plow. Do you need $200,000 plow? Leather seats and all those kind of things? Or do you need, why? Yeah, heated seats, yeah, heated seats. Yeah, that'd be nice, but we could still accomplish what we need. You know, those are some of the things that we're gonna have to choose between. So I don't know if I got your
It does,
question.
and it just reminds me of a conversation where we said, you know, sometimes when we've listed out just using the strategic plan, people felt like they had to kind of make their core basic needs fit into a strategic plan, and that shouldn't be a step
Thank
to
you
a
for
hoop.
adding that piece, and so I wanna be very clear with our staff and our community. Yes, I think the practice in the past has been, to get funding of any type, you needed to declare it as a priority. So everything was a priority, and this is how we kind of ended up having maybe 50 priorities. And so some things we just need to acknowledge, this is core functional work. It's a priority, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But it's core functional work, and that's just stuff that has to get done. But it's not what we would declare out as a priority. So yes, this helps with that conversation and get us to that end much quicker and I think more
I
efficiently.
didn't ask that
Thank you.
question very
Thank you. No,
effectively,
you
but
got
thanks
it.
for getting where I
You
was
got
headed
it. Thank
with that.
you.
All right, other comments and questions?
I've got a question. Now, we talked about taking our strategic directions and compressing them into what would really be a strategic direction versus operations. How does that overlap with this?
Yeah, so great question. So we did compress the strategic priorities, I think they used to be called, into 2 areas of focus that we would publicly report out on. But like, for example, the operational strategic directions that were in that plan initially are still front and center for Jim and his entire team. That work is still their priority.
Right.
It isn't the work that we would necessarily always be publicly reporting out on our quarterly data sheets with the board and our community. But without that work, the stuff we do report on wouldn't come to fruition. So, again, I would say this kind of a process is more for our senior team to calibrate our approach with our respective divisions, to have the conversations on what truly is a priority, whether it's the academic division or the operations division or our finance division. They're gonna have to have those conversations with their teams to really distill what is truly a distinction between their core functional work and what is truly a priority that I, as your kind of divisional lead, senior cabinet member, are gonna bring to the table when we're developing our overall budget. Because Tammy and her team will kind of manage the core functional budgets and just, this is what we're gonna allocate. Now we're talking about what are the priorities of each division that we're gonna bring forward to develop the rest of, the remainder of the budget.
And on that note, because I kind of see this, first of all, like I said, I agree with all of these. I think these can be compressed too, and I think that, you know, based upon what I saw is the ability to crosswalk our financial spend that is within our control, because like you said, the plow, you could take that a step further and say, do we want to outsource that service or buy it ourselves? But things like transportation and busing, we can't not do it. I mean, and that's a huge cost, right? So those things are kind of, they're within our control, but not necessarily something that could ever be really essentially crosswalked into this and eliminated because it competed with something else.
Correct.
But at the same time, if we do take our budget priorities of the date of the variable costs that are within our control and then map them into here, I think a couple of things are probably going to happen in that process. One, we're going to see redundancy. Not only between the bullets here, for instance, the academic plan bullet versus the strength in our academic core framework, there's a lot in common there. How much of eSTEM is part of the core framework because of the general nature of it, and also obviously the new science standards, as well as our technology requirements and math requirements and in there. So I think we're gonna, as we work through it, I think we're gonna see a little bit of overlap, and also as we crosswalk our current spend into here, I think we're gonna see or be able to develop some economic efficiencies. So I like the process, but it may be that we need to go through a process in order to really determine the end, for instance, language in here.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, it's fair. Yeah, and again, these are illustrative, okay? These are not set in stone, and yeah, there's probably some redundancy. You can compress some of these. I mean, this is quite a few. We didn't want to just give you 3 and say, hey, now,
There you go.
if this is what you want to do, we want to give you some thought starters.
Yep.
So again, I hear you that working through a budgeting process with new leadership may kind of simultaneously generate this kind of an outcome for the next fiscal cycle. That very likely could happen. And again, we're not trying to push this. This is just a conversation that we were having and that we thought warranted merit to bring to the board for your consideration, so.
Well, within that, let me just qualify, because like I said, with the process, if we were to come in December and wordsmith a little bit and say, okay, we're good, do we have the flexibility to adjust it as we go through the process and mapping the financial dollars? Or is the board going to be saying, okay, here are our priorities, this is what we voted on, we're stuck until next year?
Well, so I would say this. If you all declare priorities, I would likely believe that you wouldn't pull a priority. You may find that you missed a priority. Just as much as like we declare each year, here's our, priority areas of focus for the year. You're saying that with fairly good confidence that this is the general direction that we need to go as a district. I think the same would be for these budget priorities. If you all set priorities and say, hey, we want to make sure that, these are key things that we are hearing from our constituents, our community, that we just want to make sure that your team, Michael, is putting front and center in your budget development. And here are the 3 things, okay? That's essentially what we're trying to get to. there's a lot that will go well beyond what's stated here on, you know, in your priorities, because the budget is a big process, and you can't sum it up in just 3 things. But you all know from your conversations with community what's important to you all, what you're hearing is important to our community, and we just want to make sure that we are getting that on the input side of things, versus, as you said, Chair Nelson, saying, here's a budget, and then one of you says, yeah, but I've been hearing this and this and this, like, over and over and over, and I don't see it in the budget.
Yep.
Well, again, that'd be good for us to know
Yep.
before we're 80% baked in the budget.
Right.
And then now we have to go back and undo some things, and we've went through some tough conversations to get to that place.
Yep.
So yes, I think there is a bit of an iterative dance that would probably happen. I think it would just be things that would be revealed as priorities versus pulling back of anything.
And I would imagine this is a bit of the dance of governance and management. In other words, we as a board say, you know what, we want to make sure these priorities are out there guiding, and then we, you know, can easily look back at the last year of input we've had, issues that have come up, how we've needed to navigate those. But then there's also the management piece. You're going to take that, talk to your team, the people who are on the front lines, and say, we're coming back with our experience and saying, based on this guidance, we have to make these recommendations. And
Correct.
this may not, you know, I would imagine this is not a set in stone. This is to
Correct.
give you ideas for your discussions going forward so that your team can bring back recommendations for us to then respond to. As
Right.
opposed to, you know, we've had a few budget years, last few years, where we've asked for some big changes after the first round of it being presented. And I'm wondering if this might help start to move us a different direction in that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you bring up there, Chair Nelson. Again, I've developed hundreds of budgets over my career, but I've not done one in PLSAS,
Right.
right? And so, again, to Director Francis' point, this will allow us to calibrate new leadership as we're developing a budget. We're introducing a whole different budgeting process and scope and timeline that is different from the past. You know, still a K-12 budget, you know, we can do that, but it's the art of that. And I think we'll learn kind of the cadence that we'll establish as a board and administration. But I can't stress enough, you know, I've heard from our community on a variety of times, as you all have, as our staff have, when we engage with our community, you know, what our community is prioritizing, or what they would like to see in our schools, or some changes, or things of that nature. And so you see some of that, you know, listen here again, full disclosure, this is just some of that thinking that came from our team with our internal conversations with our community. But certainly, yes, we don't want to find ourselves come March when when we present, you know, a draft budget, we're way off mark.
Right.
Right, and so there's just a lot of inputs, I think, on the front side that could say, yeah, here are some key priorities or values that we as a board, on behalf of our community that we've been hearing, want to make sure you and your team are bringing into full consideration.
I also want to honor the hard decision-making points. Some things we'll have to give. I mean, we're just off a recent audit that said we educate for nearly $2,000 less. And so we're going to have to make hard decisions. We don't know what's going to happen with the state and
Right.
other
A
issues.
lot of unknowns.
A lot of unknowns. And so with the limits we have that some districts don't, what guidance do you need from us to make those, start having those discussions? So open it up to some other voices. What are your thoughts on if we should do this, and if so, how we should move forward with it? Is it making sense? Is it, you know?
I would agree. I think it's making a great deal of sense. I've heard at some of our flirt meetings in the past, a few times questions asked of, like you used to say it, what's our keep the lights on? What's that number look like? We would beg to see that.
Yep.
We didn't get to see it all the time in a clear fashion. So I think if we can be thoughtful and define some of this up front,
Yep.
would be extremely helpful, instead of waiting until March and April and then look back and go, oh, well, I guess there's not much we can do about that now. And it's just kind of kicking that. So
Yep.
I would like to see it, you know, yeah, there's a lot of overlap here.
Yep.
But I love that there was lots of options, and I would push it forward if the exec committee wants to fine tune it, and we can provide
Send it
feedback
back
via
out.
email.
Enrique, Stacy, Amy?
Yeah, I think it's supportive. I would be supportive of it. it's clarifying, I think, helpful. I think going forward with discussions and, you know, things that administration has to have and talking to others. Yeah, and I would, to Mary's question about changing it, I would echo kind of what Dr. Thomas said. Be careful, I think, there, because you could, you know, pulling something away after you've already had the discussions could be a big oops. So yeah, I think being pretty upfront and maintaining the document is through the whole process, because voices come out through that whole process. I mean, whenever there's change, there's a loser and a winner a lot of times. So I think just being cognizant of that and having consistency, but having this out in the front, I think will provide clarification and transparency.
And I would assume the board, as they go through the process next year, you'll all learn your working styles together. You know, we do. We have several key new leaders. We'll have new board members. And so if we use this process, and then you'll be able to refine it each time you do it.
Yep.
As you get into your style of working together. Enrique?
Yes, so taking a look at these 8 areas of focus, I don't want to say priority because I plan on using that word elsewhere. Are they ordered in order of priority, order of magnitude
They're
from? Nope, not at all, okay. All right, so that would be something to take into consideration. It's like an equalizer, you can't just turn all the different channels all the way up to
Right.
maximum and expect outstanding sound quality.
And that's one thing when Dr. Thomas, you talked about how you usually want to add more, not take away, but around budgets, it's usually the opposite. So then the prioritization becomes very important. But that's something I think a board works through, and Tammy and her team and you manage that through.
I would be fine with the executive committee taking this on and refining it and then providing, I don't know, a report out or some other advice on how they wish to proceed.
Other direction from the board? I want to make sure Dr. Thomas has what he needs when we finish.
I'm just gonna make
I'm
a,
sorry, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna make a request. I understand the consistency of executive board, but in that sense, I think, from my standpoint, I think I would step back
Yep,
and have one of the board members that's actually gonna be here in
Yep.
2023.
you're right.
So,
Right.
you know, having you fill my spot with someone, whoever's,
Yep.
yeah,
So maybe Amy takes the lead on it and makes a committee or,
yep. Yeah, I don't think 2 of us who aren't in this, like, I mean,
Yep.
so I would just step back and whoever wants to do it.
Like I said before, all these bullets, I'm on board with. I like the fact that they're put in writing. However, in my experience, when you say budget priorities, again, you want to be able to say where in the budget you're doing this. And I do think we're going to have some overlap. We're going to have, definitely, they're not mutually exclusive. And I just want to be prepared for that when we go through it. It's not that taking it away, it's more or less maybe clarifying as you go through that process of mapping what you have in your budget capabilities to each one of these. And whereas, as far as the priority goes, you always have to, something is going to get funded more than another, no doubt. But saying, you know, there's broad statements in here and there's more prescriptive statements in here, and we're going to have to understand that and rectify that as we go through, because otherwise, for instance, when we had 50 different priorities and people had to pick one and they just, you know, say, okay, I want to buy this or I want to get this, therefore it ends up here or here or here. They would, you know, pick something to fill it in. That's not what we're trying to do here. And so I just want to keep that in mind. And as far as what Stacy said, thank you for saying that, because I do think it's important that more voices come in, particularly in the short time frame.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say also, just in thinking of voice, when, so we get community feedback, and I know, Dr. Thomas, and you know, when you went out and got that feedback, I think that's important too. I also think when you start to talk about budget, it brings out different voice. Like when you start talking about, so like, didn't hear from everybody yet. So, I think knowing that as well, you have to keep that in perspective. Yeah, I think too, you know, we go through periods of time, whatever's happening in the community, that becomes relevant at that point. I think as a board director, or obviously administrator too, you have to look at it more holistically, knowing that there are priorities that are very important that no one hears about or really cares about. Hence, as a good example, is like the plow, like Jim's plow. Like, that might be really important, I mean, for us to get our, you know, but no one's gonna sit here and come up to the podium and talk about how much we need to plow. So I think that's just important too,
Yeah.
to know that that voice, you don't always hear that voice. You're gonna hear some voices depending on what, but you also have to kind of keep it in perspective of, you know, what's our role here? And that probably goes back to the mission, to be quite honest, is to keep it more holistic that way, so.
Yep.
Anyway, off my soapbox.
So direction,
Do we,
I would just say, just whoever wants to take my spot, just send you an email or whatever, whoever wants to, however you want to do it. I just don't need to participate in it.
can I ask a clarifying question? When we talked about voices from the community, is this directly from the feedback from your community sessions?
It's a variety of points, yeah.
Okay.
It's conversations with you all, it's my listening and learning, it's staff, yeah. And again, this is just illustrative.
Yep,
This
right.
is not, I mean, there's stuff that shouldn't be here, should be here. I mean, you know, 7 of you probably have 7 different iterations of this document.
Yep.
You know, so.
and I think even just looking back again at our past year, certain priorities are gonna rise to the top because of what we experienced and where we found ourselves short or needing more. You know, I can think 3 off the top of my head. So, what we could do is, in our follow-up meeting with you, Amy and I could meet with you, and then you could propose a committee, Amy, to reach out and ask, and then at that point, we can let the board know too, if other people want to send in
was gonna say, like,
suggestions or
suggestions.
comments, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
You know, what rises to the top for you, what didn't.
I think we
So
should do
that-
that.
Regardless, yeah.
Sooner, exactly. And then somebody just synthesizes that, and, I mean, you've done it before where you've taken everybody's input and synthesized, so I'd be comfortable with you taking the lead on it too, and then running it by a few people. So,
I just have one clarifying question. The effectively target our declared strategic directions, I know I asked the question earlier about our compressed strategic directions from the 5 or 6 or whatever that are out there. Are those the ones you're referring to here, the 2 primary? Okay, good, thank you.
Yep.
Otherwise, that would have been all-encompassing in itself. Okay.
so we're not crystal clear, but are you willing to be one of the leaders moving forward? And then we can coordinate through you, reaching out to gather input from everybody, working with Dr. Thomas, and deciding how to structure and propose that out.
Yeah, I'm good
All
with
right.
that.
I'm dumping that all on you, Amy, so. No, I'll be right here
Good.
with
Do you
I
have
you.
will
any-
be
Yep.
taking everyone's feedback, so
Yep.
just please get it to me.
Yep. We can send out an official ask. All right. Do you have what you need from us at this point?
I do.
On this?
I
Okay.
do, thank you.
Great. We will move right on then to the final 2022-23 budget discussion and review, Dr. Thomas.
Okay. So thank you all. And with that, I'm going to ask our Executive Director of Business Services, Tammy Frederickson, to come forward for the presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent, Chair Nelson, Board Directors. The first document that you have is the proposed final budget. If you compare it to our preliminary, what we're currently dealing with, there's really not that much change. What has been updated is the final audited fund balances. So those are reflective of the audited true numbers instead of the estimates. So as we know, we saw an increase in our fund balance, so that changed some of the the numbers. Our revenue, we've made some adjustments for the decrease in enrollment that we've seen. So we're anticipating reduced gen ed revenue. And then some other adjustments from the actual COVID. And so there was just some minor ins and outs that just resulted in not a big change in the final revenue numbers. You can see their preliminary, we had 111.8 million. We're down to 111.5 million. And then if you look at the expenditures, we did the same thing. We went from 116 down to 111.9. And basically, some of those changes, the biggest change is the vacant positions. We still haven't filled all of our vacancies, so we're going to anticipate vacancy savings for this year. But then there were also some requests that came through the previous 6 months, or I guess 5 months of this year, that we have, one of the things, we had a need for a new plow. So we did add that to our budget, and then some minor other things. So it's not a big change from the preliminary numbers. So we're just asking you to approve the final as it is in this packet. And I can answer any questions.
We're not actually voting right now, right? Yeah. 'Cause we're in study sessions. Questions?
Tammy, this is, I sent a few questions in, but one of my primary questions with the demographic data and the 4-year weighted method is just to assume that this went with our, you're basing this on the demographic predictions at the state level for our particular county and district, or, and also is the open enrollment percentages that we've been experiencing, is that also projected out based upon that same percentage?
Yeah, so that's the second document in your packet, is the enrollment projections. We are looking at the actual birth rates in Scott County, and that's reflective of what we anticipate seeing in kindergarten. The Scott County rates are declining. They are, if you look out the next, I think, 8 years, that they are declined every year, so we're anticipating that. We took a 4-year weighted methodology just because with COVID, there was a lot of unknowns that happened. So you don't really want to put a lot of weight in the last couple years, because you aren't going to really necessarily see the same trends that you had in the last couple years. That's why we took a 4-year weighted. And again, these are projections at this point. As we get closer to finalizing the budget, we'll have better numbers from Department of Education and more history of our actual enrollment. But it does take into account the open enrollment.
Sorry for pushing it forward, but revenue is so heavily dependent on enrollment. I
Yep,
figured that,
absolutely.
yeah.
And then the third document that you have in your packet is a new item that hopefully you'll be seeing every month. We are hoping to enhance this every month as we go forward. But eventually, we would like to basically give you a financial statement every month. So at the end of the year, when we have our audit come in, the financials will already be done. You'll know exactly what to expect. And we're starting with the revenue and expenditure summary. It's just kind of the easiest to look at starting out, and then we'll gradually add financial statements, our balance sheet, and all the other elements of the financial statements. But for now, and I think the most important thing to remember on this as you look at them is it's at a point in time. So this is July through October. And we have a lot of things that, revenue that come in, not necessarily in a timely manner, so there's always going to be changes. So some of these negative numbers, for instance, if you look at the other revenue for year-to-date, there's a negative 324,000. Well, that's because we had booked our federal emergency connectivity funds that we got last year, but we haven't received the payment yet. But because it was last year's business, it was booked into last year, so it reflects a credit this year, and as soon as we get that payment, it'll offset, so it'll no longer be a negative number. So things like that are always gonna happen. There's the, we're trying to do a comparison for the last couple years so you can see the percentages that come through. And again, those will change as revenue comes in and expenses go out. There wasn't too many things that kind of stuck out, but the negative 35% in fiscal year '21 for other, that was due to some resale accounts. At the beginning of the school year, we had more purchases than we had deposits at the time, so it just, again, offsets that. Once you see the November statements, it'll be a different percentage. Some of the expenses, you'll see this year, capital expenditures are a little higher than they have been. In 2021, they were 37%. The 22, they were 39, and this year we're at 65%. That the biggest change to that is because we're have a new leasing agreement for our iPads, and we paid that up front. So that's going to be reflective of there. And again, as we go through the year, those percentages will all kind of change. The debt service in '22 was 8%. And that was because we had the 2021 A bond and refinanced the 2013 A and B bonds. So again, every month, there's things that have happened, and we'll continue to kind of monitor those variances and keep you up to date on what kind of made up those variances. But we wanted you to at least see that we're pretty much on track from what we have been in the last couple years. And then just, as I said, we'll add documents to this as we go along. We're kind of trying to take this a little slow right now, but we'll, hopefully by the end of the year, you'll have a complete package that you can kind of anticipate what our audit will look like.
First of all, thank you very much. This is, I see several smiles around the table. This will be very helpful moving forward. I'd like to open up for comments and questions about the budget itself and any of the supplementary materials.
I don't have any questions. I will though, as we start looking at this monthly and
Yep.
seeing changes. And I cannot thank you enough. We need this so badly to understand where we're sitting kind of in a real-time basis. And especially with enrollment not going up. So I just, thanks for your hard work on this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and I'll give you an update. I mean, if there's things that really look out of whack, we'll do the research to see what the changes were and kind of explain those variances, so it won't just be, here you go. I just want to stress, keep in mind that this is at a point in time, and as you go through the year, these numbers will look different as we get different revenue and expenses.
Tammy, I know I sent in a whole bunch of questions, and some of them were for clarification, because the concept of the debt service fund and what it means and how we get that revenue in. I know I've received some questions from the community about that, and that's basically our debt that we levy on, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Whatever debt we have the authority to levy the principal and interest payments on that. We're required to. So our levy is always going to be able to cover our debt, outstanding debt that we have. And we work with PMA as our debt consultants. We keep in touch with them every month to make sure that they're looking at if there's a bond that we have, an older one, that we can get a better interest rate on. They let us know that there's an opportunity, and then we can take advantage of that and save some of the principal and specifically interest rates on there to reduce that debt service in the levy.
And then the other thing is on the purchase services, in particular, you know, getting as we mature in this process, and again, I echo Amy's statement, Director Crosby's statement, that, you know, this is incredible that we're getting this level of visibility, and I appreciate that, and the breakdown, and the year-to-date and the monthly, with the explanations, it's only gonna get better. But I do want to understand, with some of these, fund, especially breakdown of the general fund, what is truly variable and what is fixed. And I brought up the concept of the, you know, transportation and busing. That's not something we can just cut, you know, and I think that makes up a fairly large percentage of some of them, as well as utilities, including internet and a few others, and getting those particular areas broken down so we understand what has to be done as part of running a school district, and where we can allocate services and have prioritization within the money spent would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, we could certainly do that. There are some things that are obviously going to be like utilities, the buses, communication, but there's other things that until we see the invoice, we don't really know. I mean, if you're just looking at a vendor and making assumptions of what it is, it may not hold true. And an example of that would be, like we have, what's the name of the company? For audio visual. EPA. You would assume that that's a service, but there actually could be something else that's not necessarily a service. So it could be a repair, which would go into repairs, or it could be some other thing besides just a service. Like if we bought some supply or something, and then it would be an office supply, not necessarily a service. So we'd have to look at the invoices and kind of break it down rather by invoice rather than just a vendor type or vendor name. But we can certainly break it all down. And it should match in those monthly reports that we give you every month. We show all of the payments that we make, and it does have the detail on there. So it should match up to that. So it should be fairly easy for us to give you that detail.
That would be great. I know it's been kind of confusing to me, particularly with that technology spend, like we mentioned, the EPA audio visual, but other things like building automation systems where we spend about the same amount, but a lot of it's because something broke or a gauge is off.
Right.
And yet you do see very consistent spend. So understanding that difference, but also understanding that when we do have something fail like that, we can't just say no, we're not going to spend the money. So trying to understand what is truly a variable cost within our control, that we have some capability in order to prioritize that spend versus what it really takes to run a school district with this many buildings and all the other expenses that just have to be assumed that come with that.
All right, other comments or questions? Are we just looking for general direction from the board that we are comfortable, right, with the budget as presented?
Yes.
At this stage, okay. How about a thumbs up from everybody who's good, so we're really clear? All right, we've got direction to go. Anything else you need from us on this item? Okay, thanks, Tammy, very much for that. Next, we will head to the school calendar draft and discussion. Dr. Thomas, back to you.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. Tonight, we wanted to have a conversation with you all about our school calendar. Dr. Edwards and his team have been engaged in some conversations around looking at additional time in the calendar and how we can strengthen the core of our staff to be having some time available for professional development so that they themselves are better prepared to instruct our students. And so part of the conversation tonight, I'll just let Dr. Edwards come forward and introduce the conversation and team about the discussions that they've been having to include potential alterations for the calendar.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, Chair Nelson, and members of the board. I want to share with you, in your packet tonight, you have a sample schedule, and that sample schedule is simply rolling over essentially this year's calendar into next. But as we brought our committee together, and just for sake of context, I want to share with you a little bit, a reminder about what that is. As you recall, each year, typically, we have brought before the board in December the calendar for the upcoming school year, for the next school year. And so that is our goal, to do so at our December 12th meeting. But as we were preparing for that and talking about that, we pulled together our calendar committee in early November, and that, or might have been late October, but nonetheless, that includes teacher representation from each level, middle, elementary, and high school. And in a moment, I'll be introducing one of our members of that committee to speak a little bit about this proposal that we are wanting your consideration and feedback on. And we came together and we talked about some of the things that, some of the challenges that we currently face and have been facing now for a couple of years around the work that we find ourselves needing to do in order to best meet the needs of our students. And that coupled with a conversation that is different now than it was pre-COVID, which is we now have the flexibility, as you recall from earlier meetings this fall, with e-learning days when we have inclement weather days. So prior to COVID, and actually this was beginning actually in other districts across the state, we're implementing e-learning days in advance of COVID when they had when they had inclement weather days. And then the legislature gave us the ability to actually dictate that we would do so. And in our district, as you recall from our meetings in the fall, we will have the first inclement weather day will be a no school, no staff day. But then our plan is to implement e-learning days the subsequent days. Well, previously this calendar was built with some flex. And if you recall, a few years ago we had, I think, 5 or 6 snow days or inclement weather days. And so we were having to look at our instructional time. Well, we've always built in our instructional hours well exceeding the state requirement. And so now that we are implementing e-learning days and not losing those instructional minutes on those days, should we need to utilize them, we feel that that extra instructional time that's already built in or was built into our calendar is something that we'd like to explore more fully about what our options might be. So we as a committee met a couple of times and explored some ideas, brought it back to senior leadership in mid-November, and kind of talking about what we would like to do if we were granted the ability to have some additional time. So we gathered some feedback from our staff, and I have an overall summary of that feedback to share with you, and then brought, again, a member of our team, a middle school teacher, and I'll introduce her in a moment, to talk about what we would do with that additional time. But essentially, we emailed all of our staff or gave a survey out. We had a 47% return rate, which is a pretty high percentage of return rate, went out to all of our staff. And with that, we had a 76% or 74% in favor of increasing the number of early release days in our calendar to essentially what we're proposing is consideration of a 1 per month. So 8 of them throughout the course of the school year, not having an early release day in September, but beginning in October. And those early release days, again, we would not have to make up any instructional minutes because we're above the requirement. And they would be a 2-hour early release like we do currently 3 times throughout the course of the year. And we would utilize that time for a variety of things, and that's what I'm going to ask Ms. Schopper here in a moment to speak to. And we would find that we had, back to our earlier conversation in the world's best workforce, Dr. Thomas did a wonderful job of setting up this particular topic agenda item tonight, because I think the benefit of those monthly opportunities for early release staff time would be to look at the real-time data, like where are our students performing at the moment, and make adjustments as we need to better meet their needs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Schopper, a middle school math teacher, to speak a little bit about the highlights of what we would have our staff be able to do.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas, Chair Nelson, directors. So as teachers, we would love to have extra time to dig into the data, work with our colleagues, look at really enhancing our curriculum. You know, pre-COVID, when we could still get subs, it was not uncommon to pull a team of teachers for a day to collaborate and work on curriculum, do data dives. I remember binders, right, when it was all on paper. And we just aren't in a situation right now where we can do that. We can't get subs. We're using our prep time to sub, so we're losing that planning time. So these extra early release days would be really effective in terms of, okay, what does this student need? Like Dr. Thomas alluded to before, not just generalities, but what does Tanya need? What does Dan need, right? Really digging into that in real time and be able to make those changes much quicker. We can collaborate as teams on curriculum and sit and be like, okay, how can we enhance this lesson or this unit? You know, our students didn't perform as well last year or didn't perform as well in the previous one. What changes can we make? And so as teachers, we would welcome the opportunity to work in our buildings. A lot of the staff commented like, we want to, you know, in this building, we really need this, and in this building, we really need this, or in this building, this department needs this department. Really letting teachers kind of have that time to enhance what we're doing. So those days would be very welcomed if we could get one per month.
So next step is, again, we've gathered feedback from our staff. With your support, if you were in support of us bringing back a calendar that would reflect that, we would like to, we're prepared to send out tomorrow, if we have your support to do so, feedback to our community, to our parents specifically, and gather their input around this concept of additional early release days and see what their level of support might be. Again, worked with Christy Messman on an introductory paragraph that would describe why we are asking this, why are we putting this out, and we put it out to our parent community beginning tomorrow potentially, and collect that feedback by next Monday, and we'd pull our committee back together based upon that feedback, based upon your comments and questions here tonight. We would refine our calendar proposal and be prepared to bring a proposal before you on December 12th.
Comments and questions? Stacy?
So just to clarify, we have 3 now,
Correct. Yep.
so you're asking to add 5 more then?
Yep. So we currently have this year's calendar, and what you have in your board packet is moving this year's calendar forward, a December, a February, and a March early release day. What we'd be asking is to fill in October, November. And we would, our proposed that, we've had some preliminary conversations as a committee if we were to move this forward. And again, we'd work next week on that. But we were talking about making it like the first Wednesday of the month, for example, for ease of family scheduling and knowing when it's going to occur. Identifying those dates, obviously, up front.
Just a couple of questions. So, I've been here long enough to remember when we've tweaked this a few times. And I know the last time, or I think the last time we kind of talked about moving it, there was a lot of conversation around having full weeks of school. Like it seemed like there was a lot of, so we shifted the calendar so that there was more complete weeks of school. I'm supportive of this because of all the reasons stated. The one thing that I wouldn't be supportive is, for some reason, it contributed to student increased absences. So that would be my concern. I don't think on a Wednesday, I think that's a better chance. I mean, that not happening. Obviously, we used to have things on Fridays, I think.
Yep.
That would really contribute to that. So I think just being careful on that. But yeah, I like the frequency. I think 2 hours to me, you know, if I was a parent, doesn't seem like a huge, you know what I mean? Like, I think there can be the perception that they're missing school or they're reducing hours. And
Want to speak to that
Yeah.
particular day of like doing it on Wednesday, and what you and I were speaking about earlier today, and you were talking about how you would utilize that time when students were there on that day. Shortly.
Oh, yes, okay, now it's coming back to me.
Yep.
So when we talk, yeah, I mean, that, for me, when I have early releases in my math classroom, those are days that we call Laker days. Like, okay, we need to get test corrections done. We need to get caught up on assignments for students who are absent. We put together an enrichment activity for kids who are all caught up. Like, those are still learning days, but they're also building in that opportunity for students to catch up and then grow if they've already met all of those goals. You know what I mean? So they're not going to be just like, hey, let's throw in a movie, right? Like, they're going to be meaningful days, but you just set your activity to be 30 minutes instead of 55 or whatever. So there's still meaningful days, and having a midweek, you'll be less likely to have parents take an extended weekend, right?
Right.
So I like your idea of, because I did, when we used to have them the last day of the quarter.
Yep.
I actually kind of like that, because then the next day I could implement what I learned the day before, but we did have a lot of, we're
Yep.
gonna leave a little bit earlier, right? And I
Right.
understand that, as
Yeah, oh, I
mom
get it.
of
I
3
mean-
teens, I totally
Right.
get it. If I can sneak away for a couple days, and
Right.
I'll do that, but
But that's not the point of it.
but that's not the point of it,
if
right?
we're gonna do
Right.
it 8
That would be a
times.
convenient thing,
Yeah,
right? Right.
right,
So
right.
I do like the middle of the week and the consistency piece too, if we can find, as the mom who does the schedule as well for my family, right?
Right.
Like, if I could do it the first Wednesday of every month, it seemed to fit in the 8-week data collection. We talked about that, like, you wanna collect data, look at it for every 8 weeks
Right.
or so. It would fit in with that,
Right.
do those data dives.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, the frequency, where I see like, oh, the frequency seems like a lot, but then in the same sense, you want it to be frequent if you're gonna be able to do the data dives and to be able to react and change whatever needs to be changed for individual learning for students. I think that's really key, so.
Well, and the other piece that we didn't really touch on yet was our paraprofessionals. They're needing increased training. Well, this is gonna give us an opportunity for those 2 hours to find some designated training for them, so that they can do, because they're needing more training, and
Right.
it's hard to find time. And if we can build in those 2 hours for them
Mm-hmm.
every month to get reinforced training, or whatever they need, I'm not gonna claim to know what they need, but, it's gonna help really all of our staff.
Thanks for bringing that up, because actually that was something just recently in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I think. Emily Herman and I convened a group of paraeducators, and we talked about the professional development needs, and that was a common conversation, is we currently don't have adequate opportunities to do that on a periodic basis in, again, I'll use the term real time, when we need to pull together folks, and this would present that opportunity as well.
Did you have more?
Nope.
Enrique?
I appreciate your approach at tackling this very challenging problem of staffing shortage. I think it would be a really good solution if we're able to pull that off and make it effective. And I'm also especially appreciative that you're going out to community. It's one thing to understand what our learners need, what our staff need, also factoring in what our community and whatever those family dynamics are is especially important for parents, guardians, families. I'm curious, so increasing from 3 to 8, that also means that no early learning happens for an additional 5 days, so we'll probably feel some of that impact when you get stakeholder engagement, stakeholder input of having to secure childcare for a full additional 5 days.
And we did, when we surveyed staff, we did give this survey again out to all staff, inclusive. It wasn't just sent out to teachers or the paraprofessionals that we mentioned. All staff were given a chance to give feedback, and they too were appreciative of the opportunity to weigh in, because it's been a while, actually, since we've polled staff related to the calendar. And so I got some positive feedback around that as well. You reminded me of one topic, and now it's escaping me, so maybe it'll come back. Nope, you'll have to come back.
Other comments and questions? Julie? Oh, sorry.
I would just reiterate what Stacy said, and is that communication that's going out tomorrow, will it be decently specific to say that we would try to be consistent? I know that
We can
I know
add-
if I'm gonna read it at home, I'm gonna wanna know that it's not going to create difficulties for me as a employee. But definitely love the idea. And if we tell them it is to help personalize the learning experience for all of our students, I think those messages have to be in there, or we're gonna be faced with a lot of people saying, well, yeah, but. And I'd like to tell them, and I know you can't say for sure, but
Well, and you make a good point. I mean, those outside of our system don't know that teachers used to be pulled for data dives. And
Right.
teachers used to be pulled to collaborate at grade level, and the teachers used to be pulled from the classroom to do curriculum dives, right? Or when you're looking, like the K-12 math committee. I mean, the last time we did adoption, we would pull groups every 2 months to look at different curriculum, and we just can't do that right now. So you know, you're right, people outside of the system probably don't know the behind-the-scenes work that we do.
And I think to build on that, just to be sure in that communication that we talk about, we're not cutting learning hours, we're relooking at how we've restructured with e-learning days. We always overcompensate for how many are required. It looks like you and Christy have already connected on that.
Yep.
So just so it doesn't sound like, oh, great, you know, scores were going down and now there's less time in the classroom.
Yep.
So,
Well, this is, if I may, Chair Nelson, this is actually a strategy
Right.
based upon the scores.
Yep.
When teachers don't have the time to collaborate, to have conversation around student performance, they're just gonna be rolling the dice
Right.
on student performance. Teachers are very planful and paras as well. They want to be co-planners with their lead teachers. And this gives them that opportunity. So I would say as any of time, now is that time to find ways to bring the ability to collaborate on strategies for students and really personalize that approach to meeting those individual needs.
yep. And that was going to be my comment, is that I feel like in addition to finding a creative solution to our subbing shortage and staffing shortage, hearing from teachers that there's just not enough time in the day to get the basics done, much less do those extra things, that it's just a great outside-of-the-box way to approach it. And then it zeroes right into our mission, you know, for individualized learning, to give every kid what they need to succeed when they go on. And if you look at this, our meeting tonight, World's Best Workforce, you know, A&I, this is directly leading to strategies to address those percentages, to address those scores. I mean, there's just so many things addressed by this, and I just think, I applaud the creative thinking as we're talking about this, so. Mary?
Well, first of all, pre-COVID, and ever since I've been on the board, we've been hearing that teachers need more prep time, they need more collaboration time, the number of committees, the number of polls, et cetera, even when we didn't have the sub shortages. So I love the strategy and I like what's going on, but I want to kind of reiterate, and so that we're prepared for how to handle this for early release for parents, for families. Something that Enrique said about the e-learning or the early learning, and then what Julie said about the you know, sending it out to parents to get their feedback. Are we prepared in our community ed staffing to be able to take on more kids earlier that would normally not be latchkey or early release on those days to help parents who work? Are we prepared for the transportation issues, for extracurricular stuff after school on Wednesdays, that sort of thing? I mean, there's obviously, once you change this, there's a trickle up and down effect that this can happen, and are we going to be prepared to answer those questions for parents, hear the parent concerns, and then also have the infrastructure around that to support families that need it for the extra early release days?
Yeah, that's why we first brought this to our senior leader group when we were having this conversation at our committee level. Emily Herman and I co-facilitate that committee with the teachers that I mentioned, and we brought that to our senior leaders, and Joel, our community ed director, was present, and Kids Company, and representing that perspective, and we had a robust conversation about those types of things that actually led us to the early release. We were kind of exploring additional, having conversations about additional full days versus early release days, and landed that they would better meet our needs in the early release day. The frequency increases, yes, but the impact and our ability to meet the needs of our families, feeling fairly confident that we have been and could increasingly do so with more days in that format. So we definitely had that conversation at the senior leadership level and felt good about that.
I have one additional comment, because this happened, I think it was 5 years ago, where they made they made a concerted effort to have more professional development and all that. And what I kind of heard in the feedback this is obviously pre-COVID, that then committees, extra committees filled up the time. And so the extra time that some teachers had during, let's say, Laker Learning or other times where it was actually then filled up with things that didn't necessarily accomplish the mission. I'm assuming that you guys have thought this out and you're planning these days out to best meet the needs of students and teachers to establish our priorities or to fulfill our priorities as best as possible and not basically provide governance over that time to give the educators what they actually need to succeed and not fill up the time because now it looks like we have extra calendar time.
Yeah, that was a conversation we had.
We did, and when we surveyed our teachers and we read through the comments, I mean, you could feel in the comments, we want to kind of dictate what we need, right? And it's been really good on our early release days so far that most of them had been building specific. So in our building leadership teams, we set the tone, we set the expectations. What does our staff need? At least at the middle level, we've been, as a
That's been
team,
consistent, yep.
across all levels. So I think the intent is that we'll keep it, you know, whatever Glendale needs, Glendale will do. Whatever Hidden Oaks needs, Hidden Oaks can do. And really try to focus on keeping it more central. And when you try to do something full district with 2 hours and transportate, you know, we all end at different times. It's easier to do that on a full day to do full district things, but on a 2-hour release, when you have 3 different ending times, you know, it lends itself more to doing building specific and letting teachers kind of guide where that day goes, for the most part.
And on our committee, we also have principal reps from each level as well. And so Patrick Lynn happens to be the principal rep representing the elementaries, and he was talking specifically about their upcoming early release day, December 7th, and their planning around that. And it was a data-driven, data diving, because he hasn't been able to pull his teams together. And he was speaking about how beneficial that would be to having that opportunity more frequent. So that's kind of where that generated from, was he was sharing with the calendar committee specifically their planning at Jeffers Pond for the upcoming day next week, and led to a deeper conversation across K-12. The thing that I thought about, I knew it would come back to me, Enrique, was that you'll also note that we did poll staff, and we feel we would want to do the same for families as well, but want to give you a little heads up. We did poll staff about spring break, because it's one of the topics that Martha has said to me she gets the most phone calls about when the calendar comes out, is when spring break. So we identified 2 specific weeks. You can see in the draft calendar the week that coincides with this school year. And that's obviously one of the dates, but we also identified one in mid-March and polled our staff around that. And I won't share at this stage of the game for fear of being persuading one way or the other, but we have the results of that, and we'll share the results of both the staff and parent. We'll actually review that as a committee and come with a recommendation based upon that feedback as to where spring break lands, because that is certainly a topic of interest for both our staff and our parents in our community. So just wanted to make you aware that that question has been posed and will be posed again to parents as well.
So just to clarify, that means that the week, April 1st through 5th, that's on this calendar is not set in stone?
Correct.
Okay.
We'll come back to the December 12th with all this feedback, with a calendar that we would be recommending based upon that feedback that we've gathered. Okay. And I will probably, I'll say that it won't be unanimous with regard to that particular topic, I can predict.
Good. Anything else before we give direction tonight? All right, everybody comfortable with moving forward as planned? Let's give them a thumbs up. All right, thank you, both of you, for your time and all the effort put into it. All right, we're going to move right on to our proclamation around Inclusive Schools Week, and Dr. Thomas, you'll introduce that.
Thank you, Chair Nelson, Board of Directors. We've actually been speaking about this resolution all night long this evening. You know, we are proud in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools that we take all kids, no matter who they are, their backgrounds, et cetera, families. We are a public school system, and we're proud about that. And we serve, you know, a variety of students and families. And so this resolution is one that I think speaks to our core mission to serve all. And to be relevant and responsive to all of those that we serve. And so very proud that the board has taken a resolution on this matter. That's really reflective of who we are as a community.
I'm taking the liberty of reading the proclamation tonight. Inclusive Schools Appreciation Week, December 5th through 9th, 2022. Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognizes December 5th through 9th, 2022 as Inclusive Schools Appreciation Week. Whereas the Inclusive Schools Network and schools around the world have designated the week of December 5th through 9th, 2022 as Inclusive Schools Week, and whereas Prior Lake Savage Area Schools is committed to providing an education in schools and classrooms that are welcoming and capable of educating all children. Whereas the educators of Prior Lake Savage Area Schools recognize that each child is unique, learns differently, and therefore learns better if instruction and experiences are tailored to their abilities and interests. Whereas the educators and families of Prior Lake Savage Area Schools have been working hard to ensure that classrooms and schools are characterized as being high-performing and inclusive. And whereas by their efforts to make schools and classrooms high-performing and inclusive, the educators and families of Prior Lake Savage Area Schools have contributed significantly to building a stronger and more inclusive community. And whereas the educators and families of Prior Lake Savage Area Schools deserve to celebrate their successes and wish to reflect on how they might even further improve. Therefore, let it be resolved that the Prior Lake Savage Area Schools join with the Inclusive Schools Network, EDC, and schools, districts, and communities around the world in declaring the week of December 5th through 9th, 2022 as Inclusive Schools Week. And now we will move on to board governance and policy, and we have some board policy review introductions tonight. Dr. Thomas, I'll turn it over to you to call people up.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Board of Directors, I believe earlier this fall, there was inquiry around our student discipline policy, 506, and it has been reviewed by our legal counsel. And tonight, what we have is some of the edits that came forward from legal counsel. I would say a lot of similarities in the policy. I think a lot of rewording or even formatting of the policy took place. But I think it speaks to our ability to hold high expectations for our students and also outlines how we can address any kind of issues of discipline, you know, should students, you know, act out in a manner that disrupts the learning environment. So again, a very well edited version that you see before you this evening from our law firm that put eyes on this for us. I believe you should have a strike, okay, yes, a strike through on that too. So that is policy 506, and I will ask Dr. Edwards or Dr. Herman, Executive Director Herman, if you have any comments or pieces you need to add to that.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Chair Nelson, members of the board. I just want to reiterate that the legal review went through to ensure the requirements with Minnesota Statute 1218.61 because there were some changes there, so made sure there was an alignment with the statutorial changes to ensure we had that. Also, a lot of the cleanup was based around repetitive language in there to make sure there wasn't confusion and adding some definitions to add clarity to each of the statements.
I will, let's see, I'm sorry, Dr. Edwards, did you want to add something to that at this point?
Answer any questions.
Okay, so I'm going to open it to questions, but just building off, whenever we have legal look at something, I sent an email earlier, but on page 11 on AO, I know that legal defines sexual orientation as all-encompassing, but we've been trying to be consistent in our policy and adding gender identity in there when we're talking about discipline or harassment or anything like that. So if we want to stay consistent, I would recommend that we consider adding that as well in this policy. And then I'm going to open it up to comments and questions, and I'll save my more general questions till the end. Mary, was that you?
Well, first of all, I had to read this multiple times, because, not only because the number of changes, but the new organization of the policy itself, which I like. I'm glad that we had a law firm review this, and I'm really glad there isn't a whole bunch of multi-syllable prepositions in here as a result, so that's really good. I have a lot of questions, but my first question is on the very top sentence of page 48. We use the term, oh, I'm sorry,
24.
20, well, I've got a page for the whole PDF, and then I've got a page for the other one, but let me just put it this way. Under section B, the first paragraph on the top of the other page, we have a statement that says, behavior and student safety while the students are legally under school supervision. We have that statement, and then we go on in the whole section of Code of Student Conduct to then go further and talk about school-sponsored activities or trips, school bus stops, also apply to students walking route to and from school for purposes of attending school or school-related functions, which I interpret as the nexus to the school. I'm wondering if there's any conflict for the sentence that says legally under school supervision and our definition of what we provide oversight to under Code of Student Conduct.
Where we say that we don't necessarily provide supervision or liability in some of those cases, like walking to and from school, et cetera.
Correct.
That part, yep.
Yeah, so I didn't know if there was a conflict
Right.
there or if that's a,
Yep,
That
good
was my
question.
question too, to be honest.
I don't know if that needs clarification or if
is-
you've already
Well-
asked that question, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, because it even, I was trying to find where it exactly said it, but it basically said even if it affects school culture or environment.
Right.
Right.
Like not even
Disrupts the learning
disrupt,
environment.
disrupts the learning environment, yeah.
So that was my first question. I don't know if we need more discussion on that one. And then the other thing was my second statement was under the very long section, let me go to the top, of, I think it's under student contact for section 4B. After you get through all the crossed out sections, then we individually list, kind of embedded in that long bulleted section, starting, in the red, after you get done with the crossouts, and you go into the additional red lines of A through J on that page, we kind of pepper in, for instance, according to the violation of any student attendance policy, according to the violation of the district's hazing prohibition policy and all that. And my only concern was it may be cleaner just to put all of the policies into one statement to say violation of these policies and just bullet them out instead of kind of embedding them all over the place in here. It almost looks like you're constantly going back and forth to try and, okay, now this one says this policy and this one doesn't, and then the next bullet says, if we just kind of group the policies together, that may be a little bit easier to read. That's just my opinion. And then also some of those policies, the harassment, and when I went back and looked at them, the violence prevention, the harassment policy, I think we have a lot of opportunity to also streamline those because there's duplicative, not directly, but somewhat redundant statements in the various underlying policies too. We can kind of use this as our guiding one and then go and clean those up so they're a little bit more
Right.
distinct and
There's a
mutually
little bit of a
exclusive.
domino effect
Right.
here on a couple of others, yeah.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at a new policy advisory committee, that could be
Yep, some
Right
work
there.
there.
Yep, that's a good idea.
And may I make a request, board? So if you have your thoughts, and I'm trying to coincide my document with what you're referencing and scrolling through, but if you have them, just email that directly to me as well. Because there's a couple of things that we may want to just run past again, legal, again,
Yep.
based upon the feedback of our board. Here are some questions that we think we can answer, but that we might have to approach our council again on a couple of those as well. So particularly the scope of authority component.
So,
So-
I just wonder, is this the line you're talking about? This policy also applies to any student whose conduct at any time or in any place interferes with or obstructs the mission or operation of the school district or the safety or welfare of the student, other students, or employees?
That's the,
Open-
that's part
that's
of
the
that,
general
yeah, that's
statement.
that part of
Yeah,
the
that's the
general
general
statement, right.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're consistent.
Yep.
And, yeah, and like I said, I sent in a lot of questions, but boy, this one took a long time to digest and read over. I printed it out. And then had to look up all the other policies. So I started this on, I think, Friday, and I don't think I got through it all the way still. It's very comprehensive. The language changes, for the most part, I absolutely love. I think that it's much clearer. It's less redundant within itself, but then we do have some circuitous aspects of the other policies and some of the, like I said, the language statements there to make sure we're consistent in here. And then when I started looking through the policies, of course, then I saw the additional redundancy. But overall, I like the way it says it. I like its inclusion. And furthermore, I did check the sub-policy of the 506.1, and it does almost completely reiterate what's currently in statute. I do, and I've always said this, that where possible, can we actually put the statute underneath it so our policy doesn't stand separate from the statute, even though it's almost a cut and paste from the statute. Therefore, if the statute changes, we know what the overriding one is that would have to trump whatever's in our own policy, and then we have some safety net there for not getting to a policy in time after a statute changes.
Nelson and I talked a little bit about this, just a couple of questions. We had similar questions, I think. In regards to, it talks about student, and I'm trying to find it, that the students would be made aware of the code of conduct or whatever. So, like, it basically says that they'll be given this opportunity. I guess the question that we were asking is, what does that opportunity look like? Is this a yearly review? Does the student read a code of conduct once? Does it get signed off by a parent? Like, what does that procedure look like?
Like if I think of my experience as a parent, you know, you sign off that you read the student handbook, but is that, what I think we were curious about is like when you use some of those opening days of the school year, more and more it's been sort of about expectations and behaviors, like, is it introduced then and is it reviewed? Because a lot of the policy comes back to the students will understand and
Right.
know these are the rules. And that's why we can do it. And do we have enough time committed to that or helping them understand that? So we were trying to sort that out.
And yes, that, as we welcome students back each year, we are refreshing our students around our behavioral expectations. You'll get it both from a campus-wide conversation, but then you'll have it from a classroom expectation as well. And yes, the code of conduct, so the student handbook or the handbook, that is where it's referenced. And so there's a couple of ways that they're getting reminded on an annual basis.
Stacy, were there other ones?
Not that I can think of. It's kind of overwhelming sometimes.
when you look at
Yes,
this.
yeah.
But yeah.
Other people before I ask my questions?
I just have one other statement. The delineation of the procedures for removal, expulsion, all that kind of stuff, I think are very well done, and much more clear than the previous language. You know, and right now we're looking at these kind of one-on-one in a PDF document that's sent to us. When we get to the student handbook and we do all this online and all the other policies, are we going to get to a point where we're actually hyperlinking these together? So people aren't looking at individual policies like they do today? Because when you get to these that are so robust and the recursive, that would help.
Yeah, actually, if you recall, we did an exercise last summer and brought before you July, I want to see, I'm looking to Christy on this, if she recalls, I think it was July, when you approved handbooks and we standardized handbooks, and they had links within the handbooks to the respective policies. So we had a committee that came together last spring around that and said that would be most effective so that the handbook stays current, because it's linked to the changes. So for example, this particular policy, when we review it and go through our process here later this spring, it's up to date and the handbook reflects that.
And the individual policies that are embedded within here will be hyperlinked to the
Correct.
policy, so,
Yep.
yeah, because when I went online, I had to go and manually search out the policy, and that was, that's fine, that's part of our job to review it, but if somebody else were doing this after it was finalized, that would be, yeah, it'd be hard.
While I'm here just for a moment, I want to speak to the earlier comments around, I think it's section, I'm trying to scroll through here, where there is that listing that you were speaking about, Director Franz, of those various policies. We do definitely want legal to review, because I think there are specific policies that need to be listed, and we would want to make sure not to streamline it too much so as to take any of those out in that portion of this particular policy.
Dr. Thomas, members of the board, if I may add, I would echo what Dr. Edwards said to make sure we're in alignment, but I do appreciate the idea to add them all within the same bullets, that students are expected to understand all of the policies, including but not limited to type language, and then list the ones that are required to be listed. And then also, going back to legal will be important to make sure that we're not striking anything that we need for the statute. Some of this language might be repetitive but might be required, so I'll make sure that we follow up with them on those items.
Me, Julie, Enrique? I will send this in an email as well, because I might not be interpreting it correctly. It's just a small thing. On page 3, under the superintendent's responsibility, we list that the superintendent can be an avenue of appeal for concerns brought forward. And later in the document, and I apologize, I printed it and I don't have the page number, but I will let you know, it's shortly above Roman numeral 5, disciplinary actions. When they talk about procedures for appeal of decisions, it is the decision of the principal shall be final. However, a student or parent may ask the principal to reconsider. And I'm not sure, maybe that's a separate infraction that it's talking about, but I didn't know if it needed to be consistent that the superintendent still was an avenue of appeal if the principal was not. So I'll send you the notes on that where I have it. Again, it might be, because there's so much, it might be two different types of infractions, and that might be why it's listed that way. And then I just only had one other odd thing, and I don't know if it makes sense to even consider, and that was under student responsibilities, to express ideas on letter N, lowercase n, and I'll send this, to express ideas in a manner that will not offend or slander others. And the only thing that caught my eye was offend, as we're doing more things around caring and committed conversations. Is there a different word we want to consider where we're learning to hold space for difficult discussions and dialogue? I don't know what that word for sure is, but do you know what I'm saying? Is we're trying to teach our students to have capacity for talking about hard things. I understand the intention of not wanting to directly offend somebody, but maybe there's a different
Tolerance.
something that, because if a student in a caring committed conversation is being honest about how microaggressions affect them, it could offend somebody else at the table who's not comfortable with that term. So that, I'll send you that as well. I don't know if that's necessary, but because it's in policy, that word caught me. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one more question too that I didn't bring up, and I'm not sure it applies here anyway, but we have roles for the superintendent, for principals, for director of teacher and learning. And I assume that all the deans that are mostly responsible also as the intermediaries for behavior enforcement, as well as that they report up to the principals. But seeing that they do have a significant role, is it worth bringing up their role on, or is it just leaving the principals and the principals delegate?
I would put principal or principal designee
Okay.
because that job label could change or whatever, but.
Okay.
So everybody will send the notes or the comments they made should it be to the three of you as a team?
Sure.
Dr. Edwards, yourself, and
Sure.
Emily, okay. To Dr. Thomas that they can bring forward, and they'll do the additional checks with legal if needed and bring it forward for a few more reads.
Yep.
Okay, do you want to go on to 506.1? Bullying prohibition? I'm trying to remember who's presenting that one. I don't know that there were any changes.
no changes.
No, there's
Okay.
nothing to reflect changes
So
here.
any comments or questions on that one before moving on?
Has this been reviewed by legal again? Bullying?
Great question. Yes, it was reviewed by legal. While there were changes, the changes to the statute are not applicable to the school district. So there were no changes to the policy at the district level.
And the only thing that I requested with that one, because a lot of the definitions are taken directly out of statute through cut and paste.
Yeah.
If there is changes to kind of just reference the statute.
In the 506.1. Yep, I get that one noted.
It says that on there too, I think at the bottom.
Yeah, at the very end, policy
We did that, I think, last
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
shall be made consistent with it's right there already.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
We
Good.
did that already, yep.
I missed that on the
So do we,
list. Or,
do we
sorry.
send that to there are no changes, right?
Correct.
Right.
So,
Yep. All right, are we good with this one? Going forward? Okay, next up, we have 804, energy efficiency.
Okay, with this, I will ask Jim Delwo to come forward to review any changes for this policy.
Good evening, Chair Nelson, Board Directors, Dr. Thomas. Actually, there is no content change to this policy. There were some grammatical errors, and I missed one, so it was actually more than that. But the policy remains the same. The guidelines that are drive this policy for the operations staff remain the same. So I'd like to bring it back with take another crack at formatting.
Thank you.
Oh, so you missed one of what we see right here?
Correct.
If you look down at line 3.
Yeah.
We have to pick it apart here.
I know,
Wait, no, we don't need to, Jim.
I don't have too many chances to put you under the gun here, so I'm gonna
Okay.
do it one more time.
Yeah, so I apologize for that. But again, the content doesn't change.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Jim, I have a quick question. I know that on a regular cadence, we do have our review of our energy efficiency here done by an outsider. And we've done that regularly. Is that something we want to memorialize in this policy to say we shall or we will do this? Right now, it's kind of vague. And if we're not, if we, I know it costs money, and if that's not something we want to put shall or must in here, then I'm okay with that. I just didn't know your opinion on making sure that if, in the policy, if we are committing ourselves to doing that on a regular basis.
The report from Margaret Bishop, who monitors our energy, is an annual event. I'm not certain policy is the right spot for that, but I certainly support that. And especially this year, as we've added the energy position, we definitely are going to have Margaret back. We have a lot of good news to share in that, and it's important to me.
So do you think it's important, I'm asking everybody else this too, if we put this in here then on an annual basis or every 2 years at a minimum, that we do have, engage an outside service to evaluate our energy efficiencies and make recommendations, as we've done?
So again, I'm not quite certain policy would be the spot, Mary, but we certainly could put it in our guidelines.
Well, that's why I'm asking, would policy be the spot? You said you're not certain, and I'm asking, is that something we want to put out there since policy is available for public review and we've been doing it?
I feel like that's a management responsibility.
I'm asking that too, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just,
It looks like
That's
it
my
directs you
opinion.
to the website if you want to know about it. Right? Last sentence says the guidelines.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it's okay. We're doing it anyways.
no,
We made a commitment to do it, we budgeted for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's, okay, thank you.
We're good? Okay, thank you for that. All right, we are going to move on to, there are no first readings tonight. We do have some second readings this evening. As you, I don't know if we need any more discussion on 509.1, kindergarten early entrance. They had just had to add a deadline date to that. So is everybody comfortable with that one? All right. And then policy 213 on school board committees. I'm going to let Amy just address, she was going to update one thing in there for us.
after our discussion last time, I just added roster to the thing that we would approve annually, and as well as statement of scope. We had that in there, but felt like that was something we had discussed that needed to be included in the policy.
The rosters of
So
the committees?
it's under committee chair, 3 committee chairs. The committee chair is chosen by the board, then it goes on 4 bullet points down. The committee chair and responsible administrator, in conjunction with the superintendent and board chair, will come up with an annual statement of scope, including the roster to be reviewed by the board. It just states we review it annually,
That's fine.
but otherwise no changes.
Everybody comfortable moving forward with the new approach? Again, the goal was to increase public engagement, streamline our meetings, and hopefully become more efficient in our work. So thanks for all the work you've put into that, Amy. I appreciate that. 203, board operating norms. Again, we had just, the only change was proposing removing the restriction for business meetings, open forum, not restricting people to a topic not on the agenda. So just opening that up to anything. Any other comments or questions for that? All right. I don't know if you actually want me to go through them all and ask you for questions, or if there's any on there you just want to call out. You want me to go one by one, or is everybody pretty comfortable with where we're at after all these
I don't think there was
reads?
any changes, right?
Comfortable
with all of them.
But I'm, yeah.
All right. I won't bore you then. Next, we will go, I think we are up to then superintendent relations, Dr. Thomas.
And nothing this evening.
Okay, nothing on SR?
Nothing's, no,
Got it, okay, thank you. All right, I have no informational items listed for this evening, and did you have any topics for other that you needed to bring up?
I did not.
Okay.
Not under other topics, no.
Okay, good. Martha, did we have any forms turned in last minute for public forum this evening? All right, so at this time, unless there's anything else, I will be adjourning the study session and we will be transitioning to an open meeting. It's a fairly brief open meeting. Do you need a break in between quick? I think we need a break. Okay, I'm adjourning. I will call the meeting to order in about 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and call this brief business meeting to order. Please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, for roll call this evening, all are present with the exception of Director Drews, who is out ill this evening. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as listed?
So made.
By Stacy. May I have a second?
Second.
Who calls it?
Mary?
Mary. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 6-0 this evening. What we have up is board policy approval as listed. I can just list the numbers if you are willing to then make a motion to approve them all. Is that comfortable for everybody? All right.
Yep.
So what I'll be asking for is a motion to approve policy 201, 202, 202.1, 209, 210, 211, 212, 214. Is that it?
That's it.
And that's it, and these have been through several readings at both study sessions and board meetings. Do I have a motion to approve these?
So moved.
By Enrique, do I have a second?
Second.
By Stacy, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 6-0 this evening. Thank you. Okay, in a moment, I'm going to take a motion to adjourn the meeting and go to closed session. We will be closing the session in accordance with the open meeting law, Minnesota statute 13D.03 for the purpose of discussing negotiation strategy. Do I have a motion to adjourn this evening?
So made.
By Mary and a second by Enrique. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 6-0 this evening. All right, thank you, everybody, for all the work and contributions tonight.